Think Scotland is just about bagpipes, kilts, and Braveheart. Wait until you find out about the country where it's illegal to be drunk in charge of a cow, where an entire village speaks backwards, and where you could face serious consequences for knocking on someone's door and running away. You won't believe what I'm about to tell you about this mysterious land in the north. Number 10. Scotland has more than 400 words for snow, and weather forecasters need special training just to describe Scottish winters. You heard right. While English speakers might say sleet or flurry, Scots have an entire linguistic arsenal including sneasel to start raining or snowing, skelf a large snowflake, spitters small drops of windblown snow, and feefle to swirl, specifically about snow. This isn't just quirky vocabulary, it reveals something profound about living in a country where weather changes every 15 minutes. Picture this. You're standing in Edinburgh city centre on a Tuesday morning. It's sunny. You walk 3 blocks, now it's raining. You grab a coffee, suddenly there's hail. By the time you finish that coffee, the sun's back out. Locals call this 4 seasons in one day, and they're not exaggerating. Scottish meteorologists actually undergo additional training to accurately predict microclimates that can vary wildly within a 5-mile radius. In the Highlands, you might experience what locals call drike, a specific type of persistently dreary, drizzly weather that's so uniquely Scottish there's no proper English translation. Here's the funny part. Tourists arrive in July expecting summer, only to pack emergency jumpers after experiencing what Scots call har, a cold sea fog that rolls in without warning and drops temperatures by 15 degrees in minutes. The obsession with weather vocabulary isn't pretentious, it's survival. When shepherds in the Cairngorms use 13 different words to describe snow conditions, they're making life-or-death decisions about whether their flocks can safely graze. Americans think they understand cold weather, but Scottish cold is different. It's the kind of damp chill that penetrates your bones even at 40 degrees Fahrenheit because of the relentless wind and moisture rolling off the Atlantic. Number 9. It's actually illegal in Scotland to be drunk while in charge of a cow, horse, or even a steam engine, with potential fines up to £1,000 and possible imprisonment. Sounds unbelievable, but this is real law on the books from the Licensing Act of 1872, and yes, people still get charged with it today. In 2019, a man in Ayrshire was arrested for being intoxicated while herding cattle across a public road, causing a 3-hour traffic jam on the A77. The law specifically states you cannot be drunk while in charge of any carriage, horse, cattle, or steam engine. And here's the scary part, drunk is defined so loosely that you could technically be charged even if you're just buzzed. Think this is an outdated law nobody enforces? Think again. Scottish police actually issued 37 citations related to this statute in the past 5 years, mostly to farmers during agricultural shows, who celebrated a bit too enthusiastically before loading their livestock for transport. The maximum penalty isn't just the £1,000 fine, you could face up to 51 weeks in prison. Now imagine you're an American tourist who thinks it'd be funny to take a tipsy horseback ride through the Highlands after sampling too much whiskey at a distillery. What seems like a harmless adventure could land you in a Scottish jail cell. The steam engine clause particularly fascinates legal historians because it's never been removed, despite steam engines essentially disappearing from daily life. There's a running joke among Scottish lawyers about someone getting arrested for drunkenly operating a vintage steam locomotive at a heritage railway. But here's what makes this law genuinely important. Scotland has more agricultural workers per capita than most of the UK, and livestock-related accidents cause serious injuries every year. When a drunk farmer loses control of a bull in a crowded market square in Stirling or Inverness, the consequences can be deadly. The law reflects Scotland's agricultural heritage that still shapes daily life in ways Americans might not expect from a developed European nation. Number 8. Scotland has over 790 islands, but more than 90% are completely uninhabited, and some islands have only one resident who serves as the sole human population. Wait until you find out what life is like when you're the only person on your entire island. Take Jura, for example. It has a human population of around 200 people but is home to approximately 6,000 red deer. That's a deer-to-human ratio of 30-1, meaning deer literally outnumber people by orders of magnitude. On the island of Fula, one of Britain's most remote inhabited islands, there are only 30 residents, no police station, and the island is so isolated that during winter storms, it can be completely cut off from the mainland, for weeks at a time, with no ferry service or supply deliveries. Imagine running out of coffee or medicine with no possible way to get more, for potentially 2 months. Here's the kicker. Several Scottish islands have populations of exactly 1 person. These solitary island dwellers often serve as lighthouse keepers, nature wardens, or simply stubborn individualists who purchased their island decades ago and refuse to leave. One man has lived alone on the island of Swona for over 40 years, surviving on rainwater solar power and occasional supply drops from fishermen. No internet, no phone signal, no neighbors within miles of choppy ocean water. You heard right. There are people in 21st century Scotland living more isolated than Antarctic researchers. The economic reality is stark. Maintaining infrastructure for tiny populations is prohibitively expensive, so the Scottish government has essentially abandoned services to many islands. If you live on Mingulay or Berneray, you're responsible for your own power generation, water purification, and medical care. The Royal Mail will deliver to inhabited islands, but postal workers joke about delivery routes where they literally have one house to visit on a 3-hour ferry journey. Compare this to America, where even remote Alaskan villages have airstrip access and government services. Scottish island life represents a level of isolation and self-sufficiency that would terrify most modern urbanites, yet these communities fiercely protect their way of life. Number 7. In certain traditional Scottish communities in the Highlands and Islands, there's an unwritten social taboo against whistling at night or whistling indoors, believed to summon evil spirits or bring disaster. Think this is ancient history nobody follows anymore. Walk into a pub in Lewis or the Outer Hebrides at 9 p.m. and start whistling. You'll see grown adults physically recoil, and elderly locals will immediately scold you, genuinely disturbed by your breach of protocol. This isn't just superstition, it's embedded social law that locals take as seriously as Americans take not cutting in line. The belief system traces back to Celtic mythology, where whistling after dark was thought to call upon spirits of the dead or attract malevolent fairies. In fishing communities like those on the Isle of Skye or in small Highlands villages, fishermen's wives would never whistle while their husbands were at sea because it was believed to whistle up a storm that could sink boats. Here's the scary part. Break this taboo as an outsider, and you won't just get strange looks, you might be asked to leave. A tourist from Manchester reported being ejected from a guest house on Harris after repeatedly whistling while preparing for bed, despite the owner's warnings. The proprietor wasn't joking around. She genuinely believed the visitor was inviting catastrophe into her home. Similar taboos exist around various behaviors. On certain islands, you never take the last piece of bread without offering it to others first, and in some Highland homes, you never open an umbrella indoors for similar supernatural reasons. The persistence of these beliefs in modern Scotland shocks sociologists. We're talking about communities with internet access, smartphones, and Netflix subscriptions who simultaneously maintain supernatural belief systems that predate Christianity. It's like discovering that somewhere in suburban California, entire neighborhoods refuse to walk under ladders, not out of casual superstition but genuine fear of metaphysical consequences. In remote Scottish communities, the old ways aren't quaint traditions for tourists, they're living belief systems that govern daily behavior, and outsiders who mock or ignore them face real social consequences, including exclusion from community events, refused service at local businesses, and genuine hostility. Number 6. Scotland has a serious problem with deep-fried food that goes far beyond the stereotypical fish and chips. Chip shops regularly deep-fry pizza, chocolate bars, and even entire haggis, contributing to some of the worst heart disease rates in Western Europe. You heard right. Walk into a chippy in Glasgow or Edinburgh and you can order a deep-fried Mars bar, a deep-fried Snickers, or even a deep-fried creme egg. This isn't a novelty item for tourists. Locals genuinely eat these as regular menu items, and some chip shops report selling hundreds per week. The deep-fried Mars bar has become so culturally significant that it's now considered a genuine Scottish dish, despite being invented only in the 1990s in Stonehaven. Here's where it gets genuinely concerning. Scotland has the worst heart disease death rate in Western Europe, with cardiovascular disease killing approximately 14,000 Scots every year. In areas of Glasgow, male life expectancy is 54 years, lower than some developing nations and comparable to war-torn regions. The Scottish diet culture represents a public health crisis that the government has struggled to address for decades. Deep-fried pizza is exactly what it sounds like. an entire slice or even whole pizza, battered and submerged in boiling oil until crispy. The result contains an estimated 1,000 calories per slice with over 50 grams of fat. Think American portion sizes are bad. Scottish chip shops serve portions that would make Texas steakhouses jealous, and it's completely normalized. A standard fish supper includes fish, chips, and often additional fried items, totaling easily 2,000 calories in a single meal. But here's the complex part. This food culture emerged from poverty and industrial labor history, when Scottish men worked brutal, 12-hour shifts in shipyards or coal mines. High-calorie, cheap-fried food was economically necessary fuel. The culture outlasted the economic conditions that created it, and now it's killing people. Glasgow's motto isn't officially, "Why cook anything when you could fry it?" But it might as well be. The Scottish government has attempted interventions including mandatory calorie labeling and marketing campaigns, but changing a culture's relationship with food is infinitely harder than changing laws. Walking through working-class Scottish neighborhoods, you'll see chip shops every few blocks the way California has Starbucks, and the mortality statistics reflect this ubiquity with devastating clarity. Number 5. The Scottish Gaelic language is dying so rapidly that entire traditional knowledge systems are disappearing. There are now fewer than 60,000 Gaelic speakers left, with most over age 60, and dozens of unique Gaelic words describing Highland landscapes have no English equivalent and will vanish forever within one generation. Wait until you find out what we're losing. Words like scoth, a shadow cast on a moor by clouds, Rianach Mawim, the shadows cast on the moorland by cumulus clouds, moving across a clear sky, Shianalas, a longing for a person or place that you can't return to, and Comla Breacan, meaning the meeting of two or more streams, exist in Gaelic, but have no precise English translations. These aren't just poetic words, they represent centuries of accumulated wisdom about reading weather patterns, navigating landscapes, understanding ecological relationships, and expressing emotional states specific to Highland life. Here's the devastating part. When the last native Gaelic speakers die, humanity loses unique ways of understanding the world that simply cannot be recovered. In 1991, there were 65,000 Gaelic speakers. Today there are approximately 57,000, and most are elderly speakers in the Outer Hebrides. Children aren't learning it as a first language except in tiny pockets of the Western Isles. The decline accelerates yearly despite government funding for Gaelic medium education and BBC Alba, a Gaelic television channel. Linguists call Gaelic severely endangered, the same classification given to languages spoken by isolated Amazonian tribes. Think about that. Scotland, a wealthy European nation with universal education and digital infrastructure, is watching its indigenous language die in real time and seemingly can't stop it. The English Crown's historical suppression of Gaelic after the Highland clearances created conditions where speaking Gaelic marked you as poor, backward, and uncivilized. Generations of Scottish children were beaten in schools for speaking their native language, creating linguistic trauma that persists today. Modern Scots often feel ambivalent about Gaelic. They acknowledge its cultural importance but don't speak it and aren't motivated to learn. This creates a death spiral. Without daily speakers, the language becomes a museum piece rather than a living communication tool. Compare this to Welsh language revival in Wales, which has been substantially more successful through aggressive government policy. Scotland's half-hearted efforts feel like watching someone slowly die while doctors provide comfort care instead of aggressive treatment. When the last fluent speakers pass away, probably within the next 20 years, Scotland loses an irreplaceable part of its heritage, and with it, unique ways of perceiving reality encoded in grammar and vocabulary that shaped Highland culture for over 1,500 years. Number 4. Scotland experiences some of the strongest and most persistent winds in Europe, with certain locations averaging wind speeds over 35 miles per hour year-round, making everyday activities like walking or even opening car doors genuinely dangerous and occasionally fatal. Sounds unbelievable, but the Cairngorm mountain plateau regularly records average wind speeds that would constitute a tropical storm in the Caribbean, and this isn't during occasional winter storms. This is normal Tuesday afternoon weather. The Summit Weather Station at Cairngorm has measured wind gusts exceeding 170 miles per hour, comparable to Category 5 hurricane force winds. Here's the scary part. People die from the wind in Scotland. Not from dramatic accidents like being blown off cliffs during storms, though that happens too, but from mundane situations like walking to their car in a supermarket parking lot during what locals would consider a bit breezy. In December 2021, a woman in Aberdeen was killed when wind slammed a commercial building's door against her with such force that it caused fatal injury. Dozens of similar deaths occur in Scotland every few years when unexpected wind gusts turn everyday objects into deadly projectiles. Living in Scotland's windiest regions fundamentally changes daily life in ways Americans cannot imagine. In Orkney and Shetland, the northernmost island groups, locals literally walk at a 45-degree angle as their default posture because standing upright is physically impossible on average days. Children growing up in these islands develop entirely different walking mechanics. They learn to lean into wind the way Dutch children learn to ride bicycles. Car doors must be held tightly when opening or they'll be ripped from their hinges. This isn't exaggeration. Body shops in Stornoway and Lerwick report replacing dozens of car doors annually from wind damage. You heard right. The wind is so persistent and powerful that it warps architecture and town planning. In the Shetland Islands, there are virtually no trees because sustained winds prevent them from growing. The landscape looks almost lunar, treeless, windswept moorland as far as you can see. Builders design houses low to the ground with minimal windows and use special brackets to secure roofs because traditional construction would simply blow apart. During winter gales, which occur several times per month, schools close, not because of snow but because walking outside is legitimately life-threatening. Wind chill calculations in northern Scotland reach terrifying levels. A 30-degree Fahrenheit day with 50-mile-per-hour winds creates effective temperatures of -10 degrees or colder. Compare this to somewhere like Chicago, famous for wind, where average wind speeds are around 10 miles per hour. Scotland's windiest locations sustain triple that speed constantly. The psychological impact of relentless wind shouldn't be underestimated either. Residents report higher rates of anxiety and stress-related conditions, and the constant roaring sound of wind can make sleep difficult for newcomers who never quite adjust to the audio assault. Number 3. Scotland has an unusual legal principle called right to roam that gives everyone, citizens and tourists alike, the legal right to access almost all land, including private property, allowing you to legally walk through someone's backyard, camp on their lawn, or hike across their farm without permission. Think you understand property rights? Think again. Under the Land Reform Scotland Act 2003, Scotland implemented one of the world's most radical land access laws, fundamentally different from English or American property concepts. You can legally set up a tent in a farmer's field without asking, walk through someone's estate grounds, or traverse private forests, and the landowner cannot stop you, threaten you, or charge you. The only restrictions are that you must behave responsibly, not disturb crops or livestock, and avoid land immediately surrounding occupied buildings. This isn't theoretical. Approximately 40 million visits to Scotland's outdoors occur annually under right to roam laws, and the vast majority of Scotland's land is privately owned, meaning most outdoor recreation happens on someone's private property. Wait until you find out how this works in practice. Imagine buying a sprawling Highland estate for £5 million, only to discover hikers can legally walk across your lawn, campers can pitch tents in your meadow, and mountain bikers can ride trails through your forests. And you have absolutely no legal recourse to stop them unless they cause damage. For wealthy English landowners who purchase Scottish estates expecting privacy, this comes as a shocking revelation that often leads to bitter conflicts. Signs saying, "Private property, no trespassing," are legally meaningless in Scotland except in specific circumstances like military installations or active railway lines. The law represents a profound philosophical difference in how Scottish culture views land ownership compared to Anglo-American legal traditions. In Scotland, land ownership conveys certain rights but doesn't include the right to exclude the public from accessing it. This stems from historical frustration with aristocratic landowners who controlled vast estates and prevented ordinary Scots from accessing their own country's landscapes. Here's where it gets complex. The law only works because it's paired with a cultural understanding of responsible access. Scottish outdoor enthusiasts generally follow the Scottish Outdoor Access Code, which encourages leaving no trace, respecting privacy, and avoiding disruption. This social contract allows remarkable freedom without descending into chaos. Compare this to America, where property rights are nearly sacred and, castle doctrine laws allow shooting trespassers in some states. An American tourist could walk for days through the Scottish Highlands, camping wherever they choose, crossing dozens of private properties and never need permission or pay fees, a level of freedom that would be criminal trespassing almost anywhere in the United States. Number 2. Scotland has an ongoing demographic crisis where rural villages are literally dying because young people cannot afford housing due to wealthy outsiders buying properties as vacation homes, leaving entire communities with 70% of homes sitting empty most of the year, while locals are, well, forced to move away. Here's the devastating reality. Walk through picturesque highland villages like Plockton or coastal towns in the Western Isles during winter, and you'll find street after street of darkened, empty homes owned by wealthy English retirees or London investment bankers who visit maybe 2 weeks per year. Meanwhile, young people who grew up in these communities, whose families have lived there for generations, cannot find housing and must move to cities for work. In some island communities, the average age is now over 50 and rising every year because there are literally no young families left. Primary schools are closing because there aren't enough children. The Isle of Rum had only 22 permanent residents as of 2023, despite having over 50 residential properties. The difference is vacation homes and rentals. This pattern repeats across Highland Scotland, Tobermory, Portree, and countless smaller villages face the same crisis. Properties that local families could afford in the 1980s for £30,000 now sell for $400,000 or more, purchased by outsiders with urban salaries or retirement savings that really dwarf local earning potential. A teacher or nurse working in the Highlands might earn £28,000 annually, nowhere near enough to compete with buyers from London or Edinburgh. Here's the scary part. When young families leave, communities spiral toward death. Local shops close because there aren't enough customers. Bus services stop running because ridership drops. Medical practices can't attract doctors because there's no community to serve. This creates a feedback loop where the remaining elderly population gradually ages in place with fewer services each year until the community effectively ceases to function. The Scottish government has implemented some controls. The Isle of Skye now requires planning permission for new holiday lets, and some communities have used land reform laws to purchase properties collectively, but these measures feel like band-aids on a hemorrhaging wound. You heard right. Scotland faces a crisis where its most beautiful regions are being turned into empty museum pieces for wealthy outsiders, while the people who make those places culturally meaningful are economically expelled from their homeland. The cultural loss is incalculable. Gaelic-speaking communities vanish, traditional knowledge disappears, unique dialects die out, and the social fabric that made these places special dissolves. In 50 years, the Scottish Highlands might resemble a theme park. Beautiful scenery maintained for tourists, but no actual living culture. Number 1. Scotland has one of the highest rates of knife violence in the developed world, with Glasgow once holding the grim distinction of being the murder capital of Western Europe. Carrying any blade over 3 inches in public, including, believe it or not, a butter knife from your kitchen, is illegal and can result in a 4-year prison sentence. Wait until you find out how serious this problem became. In 2005 to 2006, Glasgow recorded a murder rate of 40 per million residents, higher than London, higher than most American cities, and actually approaching rates seen in developing nations. The violence was so extreme that the United Nations and World Health Organization sent researchers to study Glasgow as a case study in urban violence within a wealthy nation. This wasn't gang warfare or organized crime in the American sense. This was interpersonal violence erupting from poverty, sectarianism, alcohol abuse, and generations of normalized aggression. Here's the shocking part. Scotland's knife crime isn't distributed evenly. In certain Glasgow housing estates like Easterhouse or Drumchapel, growing up in the 1990s and 2000s meant knowing multiple people who'd been stabbed and likely carrying a blade yourself for protection. Young men, often teenagers, would stab each other over minor disrespect, territorial disputes, or simply while intoxicated. The violence became so embedded in community culture that it was passed down generationally. Fathers who'd carried knives in the 1970s raised sons who carried knives in the 1990s, who raised sons who carry knives today. The Scottish government's response was draconian by American standards. The Criminal Law Consolidation Scotland Act makes it illegal to carry any bladed article in public without what they call a reasonable excuse, and honestly, that definition is extremely strict. Forget your pocket knife in your jacket after a camping trip and get stopped by police. That's potentially 4 years in prison. Teachers have actually been arrested for having craft knives in their cars, forgotten after school projects. The law specifically bans selling knives to anyone under 18, including kitchen knives, and retailers can be prosecuted for failing to verify age. You cannot legally buy a butter knife at Tesco if you're 17 years old. Think this seems excessive? Consider the results. Glasgow's violence reduction efforts, led by the Violence Reduction Unit starting in 2005, combined strict enforcement with public health approaches, treating violence like an infectious disease. By 2021, Glasgow's murder rate had dropped approximately 70%, from 40 per million to around 11 per million, still higher than most of the UK, but, a dramatic improvement. The VRU's tactics included working with emergency room doctors to identify stabbing victims and intervene before retaliatory violence occurred, employing former gang members as violence interrupters, and creating programs that gave young people alternatives to street culture. But here's what tourists don't realize. Walking through certain Glasgow neighborhoods at night remains genuinely dangerous in ways that shock visitors from other UK cities. The legacy of violence persists in territorial mentalities, where which housing estate you're from can determine whether you're safe in certain areas. Sectarian tensions between Catholic and Protestant communities, primarily expressed through football club allegiances, Celtic versus Rangers, still occasionally erupt into violence. Scotland's knife crime problem reveals an uncomfortable truth. Even wealthy developed nations can harbor pockets of violence and social dysfunction that resemble developing world conditions when inequality, historical trauma, and cultural factors converge in specific communities. So we've just discovered Scotland's most shocking secrets, from deadly winds and dying languages to empty Highland villages and the murder capital of Europe. Which one shocked you the most? Did you know about Scotland's radical trespassing laws or its deep-fried food obsession? Drop a comment below and subscribe for more surprising facts about countries you thought you knew.